Hello, and welcome to Cathy and Dave's Hobby Hangout. I'm Cathy, this is Dave.
Don't be afraid to talk a little louder. Sometimes it's difficult to catch it.
Oh, okay. Right, okay.
Hello. I'm looking for my knife. There we go. Yes, it's another hobby hangout where we hobby and hang out with as many of you lovely people that want to hang out with us, live or
Later.
in the past.
It'd be the future, wouldn't it? We'd be in the past.
We'd be in the past, they'd be in the future, yes.
Later.
Later.
Why I said later.
Okay.
Live or later.
Live or later, that kind
Those are the two options.
that works better than my...
Yes.
Often things work better than my waffle. I waffle.
I think we'll go.
Yes, hobby hangout time. How are you? Is that first?
Yes.
There we go.
I'm okay. Yeah, I'm actually going to the office to work tomorrow. So we thought I was going to do that 3 weeks ago and it'd be a regular thing, but now it's just a every so often thing. So I've packed my bag full of all the things I need because you're not allowed to use anything that's in the office. All the things aren't in the office anymore. So I had to take my own bowl and cutlery and pens and all sorts of stuff.
By when she says her own, she means the toddler's bowl, but for good reasons.
Like he has plastic bowls that are less likely to break. Don't take as much room in my bag.
Yes, no, I mean that's perfectly reasonable, but it's a Mickey Mouse bowl.
How are you?
How am I? I'm not doing too badly. We had the record number of people in the library today.
Okay.
I mean, not at once, but 29.
Ooh.
That's pretty good. It's more than we've had for a long time. But I mean, let's ignore the fact, watch him out. That's the fact that we've been closed for 6 months. But yeah, 29 people. That was pretty good, and that wasn't even with large families with children being counted. So, I mean, we have families with children, but like just one child. So yeah, pretty good. I'm going to spend most of tomorrow buying books.
Cool.
Because I've got a large amount of money to spend on books for the library.
Well, that's nice.
That's what. Yes, hopefully that will be nice. I have been told that the selection I bought previously was acceptable by one of my colleagues.
What
High
tone of
praise.
voice did she say?
High praise indeed. No, she was reasonably pleased with it. I think she was a bit worried about what I'd end up with, given my personal preferences on books.
Well, that's different.
But
to doing
I
stuff for the
actually
library.
do know what I'm doing with my job. Shockingly. Although I might need to have a small discussion with her about what I view as acceptable condition for gifts and what she thinks is acceptable condition for gifts.
Do you guys just like the word acceptable a lot?
Yes.
Okay, because when you say acceptable to me, that sounds not great, but I think I'm probably thinking of grading systems, where it's like acceptable is like, this was just a pass and nothing.
Okay, no, I think, yeah, I'm just using it as I've got more leeway.
Mm-hmm.
She's very much like, if it looks slightly grotty, won't have it. It's like, well, it's like, if it's better than one we got on the shelf, then we keep it.
Yeah.
And if it's, if I wouldn't mind, if I'd pick it up and read it fine, then, yeah. But hey, everyone I suppose has their views, but I've got some I want to use, so I may have to just cite seniority insofar as I'm supposed to be in charge.
Okay.
Anyway, but there, that's a different problem altogether. So that would be that. What are we reading? What have you read? Or what are you doing? Do you want to do?
Yeah, what are you doing?
I need to write this down at some point.
Should stick it on the wall.
Yeah, we should stick it over the wall over there, and I can pretend to know what I'm doing.
Like we know what we're doing.
I mean, if you're watching this, it's highly likely you know full well that we don't know what we're doing.
Well, we always have to laugh at the fact there might be new people watching.
Fair right, yes, actually no, we're highly professional.
Well, let's not oversell it.
Yeah, no.
At some point when you actually get all of these on YouTube, I was going to do a Twitter thread of just like,
I mean,
this is on the different ones, but I was going to preface it with please expect no polish whatsoever.
I mean, the ones that go on YouTube, that they have like the front bit cuts out where we're just sitting on our phones waiting for the live to catch up, so we can then share it on our personal feeds.
When this is on YouTube, you should just give them that away.
Fair point, but you know,
I don't think you're going to bother to edit this.
I'm not going to do that much. My editing skills are not that good. I mean, I can throw together a fun little video, and I've recently done a couple for walkthroughs of libraries when we've opened. A walkthrough of Yardley Wood's children's section for presenting to children. So I'm getting better at video editing. It's just, yeah,
There you go.
I can't edit a section out of the thing without it being very obvious. So, anyway.
Yes, I kind of know how to do that with audio, but there's usually silence.
Yeah, audio is easier because you just stop
Yeah.
and be quiet, and you don't have to worry about people jumping.
You can also get a chunk of silence at the beginning and just insert that.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Unsurprisingly, I'm building Sazabi again.
Which bit of Sazabi are you building?
I'm
this
currently
time?
building arm units. Building basically the internal structure that will be both the arms, which is fun. I've also recently, as of 2 days ago, bought the one that goes with this one. Finally came back in stock. I'll have my own new Gundam, which excites me and nobody else cares. So, do you care? Insofar it's going to be in your house, but not really beyond that.
Well,
Sorry.
it's fine. It makes you happy. That's alright.
They mostly get hidden away.
I mean, I can see some now, but sure.
I said mostly.
There's one on top of our Christmas tree.
Yeah. Man is working on Gene Stealer cults. He has a lot of Gene Stealer cults to work on.
Okay.
He also needs to work on how he's going to stop my Death Watch, Death Knight, not Death Watch, Deathwing Knights murdering them horribly.
I mean, presumably he has time to work on that since we don't.
Oh
know
yeah,
when.
I was going to say yeah. He's got plenty of time. I mean, to be honest, I think what he's going to do is hope that by the time we get to play, the Codex supplement for Dark Angels would have come out, which will have then nerfed them. I believe that's his strategy at this point, which, to be fair, is not unreasonable. They are broken.
Okay.
Anyway, I'll be quiet about it.
Yes.
I thought I'd share what my man was doing.
No,
It's easy.
that's fair enough. He's sort of our unofficial research person.
Yeah.
Because he's not talking. He can just Google things as we talk and correct us. But that can be useful. Thank you, Chris.
And to be honest, he'll do that to me in person, so, you know. Anyway, what are you doing?
Oh, so I'm cutting out things again. Not Spider-Man this time. I'm just basically cutting out bits of Christmas cards to kind of reuse for like wrapping paper or decorations or making cards or something. It just seems like a good use of it. So.
He's just said by the time we get to play, we may well be on 10th edition. We're on 8th at the moment.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Hey, I'm up for a game at any point, Mano. You know, just you know,
we stop being in the
pandemic, you know. Anyway,
cutting out things like there's a cute penguin.
that was a cute penguin.
Yeah, so I cut out the cute penguin. Just cutting out stuff from Christmas cards and then put them in the bag, and then we'll see, because our little boy might want to do some sort of stick in or make some cards, or we could put them on wrapping paper. Well, I'm kind of trying to stop using wrapping paper because a lot of it isn't really recyclable, and I suppose you just wrap it once and then you chuck it away, so it's very single use. Whereas if you get like plain paper that is recyclable, and then you can just jazz it up a little bit, so that's probably a bit better.
on a random tangent, but related, but not very useful because I can't remember the full details. I did read that some supermarkets are going to be reducing their glittery stuff at Christmas.
Yes, I think it was it Sainsbury's and Waitrose?
I think so.
Yeah, I have some people mention that.
Which I think is quite good. I mean, while sparkly stuff at Christmas is very nice and we all love a bit of glitter, it's not very environmentally friendly if you want to recycle things, so...
There's a lot of glitter in my work bag that I barely touched in months, which I think was because presumably something that our son brought home from nursery at the beginning of the year was quite glittery, and I put it in my bag, and then the glitter's just sat there for months. There was also some lentils in there as well, which I think was from a different craft, so... But it's a long time ago, at the beginning of 2020, so...
I mean, it's both actually, literally, and, emotionally a long time ago, so...
Yes.
But, anyway.
Yes. What are you reading?
What am I reading? I mentioned this last week, but I have actually, paid good. For a week's worth of... I mean, I'm pretty much... That's... The small bit is the bit I've got to read left. So this is Last Wish by
You probably should have checked how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
Before you did this.
Mistakes were made.
That's what you're supposed to do.
Andrzej Sap. It's the person who wrote The Witcher, or at least these books inspired The Witcher.
Andrzej Sapkowski?
We're going to go with that.
Right.
Yeah.
This is what you should look at for interviews with people where somebody says their name.
Because that's a J at the end.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what you do with that. I can do some Polish.
Yeah.
Is it Polish? I'm not actually 100% sure, but I can do some Eastern European names, but I'm not always
I love.
sure.
I love.
Last time I checked some with a colleague of mine who's part Polish, she said I got it right first time. And I was like, oh, okay.
I'm always interested by Polish names because there's so many words and letters in them, and it's no, I never idea how to pronounce it. But anyway, so this is The Last Witch. This is the books that inspired the Witcher computer games and then the TV show. Reading this is kind of like watching the TV show, really, or vice versa. Most of the plot in this is very similar to the TV show, so obviously they have adapted quite closely, which is good. I enjoyed the TV show and I'm enjoying the book. It's nice and easy going as well because I'm most of the way through it already. Although I don't know, obviously having seen the TV show, Geralt will always now be Henry Cavill. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. I mean, certainly in my head it works fine for the version in the book. So I'm not sure what other people might have thought who've read the books first. But yeah, I am enjoying it, and it has the similar non-linear storytelling that the TV show had, which is quite interesting. And I mean, there hasn't been that many surprises because obviously having seen the TV show, I can see where it's going. But no, enjoying it. So I will most likely see about the... I certainly know we've got one of the later ones at one of my libraries. I think it's Blood of the Elves.
How many are there?
6. Well, there are 4. 4 of the covers on the back. Mm-hmm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 8 if you read if the printed by go around. So yeah, I think if you enjoyed the Titwick TV show Penguin, I think it's well worth a read. I don't think you'll be disappointed by reading the book if you've enjoyed the TV show.
English is like that.
What?
You were saying that Polish there's a lot of letters in there and you're not sure how to say them. Because they're unfamiliar, but English names like that. Some of them. If you look at a lot of place names, Chelsea Beecham, the name that's quite often pronounced Fanshawe or Chumley just chuck a load of extra letters in. So
No,
I think
fair
it's just they're chucking in different letters than what you used to.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. We're not going to go so far into what you've read because it's the kind of
Yeah. So what I've read is Snuff by Terry Partchett, which is the last of the Discworld City Watch books. And since I've just finished reading it, we thought it made sense to do that as today's topic. So yes, we will be talking about the Discworld City Watch series. So the last Discworld series we did was the Death books, but that was only some, and this is more.
yes, more definitely.
It's about twice as many.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
well, I think to be fair, the Death ones were a lot more metaphysical, and I think there's only so many metaphysical stories you can do, whereas the Watch ones are a little bit more grounded.
Well, the Watch, yeah, that's true.
You can do more.
I think the Death ones tend to be a little bit more mythic, and actually metaphysical. Whereas, yeah, the Watch ones are kind of each one's. It's mostly more of an ensemble, although it does end up being mostly about Sam Vimes. But it's kind of the kind of changing fortunes of what starts out as the Ankh-Morpork Night Watch, and then goes on to bigger and better things. But each one's kind of a mystery, and there quite often is something supernatural in there because it's fantasy and it's Discworld. But it's sort of not. It's sort of like somebody working in a world of that rather than supernatural being the central thing. And then quite often it's just the setting, and there's little that's actually supernatural. It's more just the crime or the mystery or things. But these are the say very Ankh-Morporky ones. They start out being very Ankh-Morpork set, which is the main city in Discworld. But then there are other series or standalones of things tend to have quite a lot of Ankh-Morpork stuff in as well. Yeah. And then actually the watch books start to kind of go on like field trips a bit.
I think the first couple of ones, obviously they set the groundwork for Ankh-Morpork, and then move outside while the
interesting. Kind of there's a lot of comparison, I think, then. So
and then you've got the ones that the Lipvig ones and the ones that kind of take over.
Yeah.
The telling the story about Morpork, and it's
yeah, because as you go through Discworld, it all becomes a lot more like interlaced and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, so it
makes sense.
I just realised I know we couldn't find one in our collection, so we're missing one to physically wave at the screen. But I realised we've missed the most important one. Where's my cow? We
did forget Where's My Cow. Because that would be, I mean, that's a lot of books now.
Yes. No, I'm just saying that we forgot to.
I mean, I know Where's My Cow is.
Yes, so do I, but so anyway.
Okay.
I just realised we had forgotten to bring Where's My Cow down.
Well, I mean, if you want to rush and guess.
I'm okay. I will just cope with the.
Right. So there are 8 books in the sequence, but then there's kind of like a special mention to Monstrous Regiment, which I don't think strictly is a watch book, but a lot of a fair few of the characters are. That's one where they kind of go on a field trip, but it's not mostly about them. So that one's kind of.
Yeah, I think it ties into some of the themes that you get through some of the other watches, like the dwarf women.
Well, no, it's more about... No, I've seen somebody on the internet describe Monstrous Regiment as like Mulan, where everyone is Mulan, and also he's really up the anti-war message because some people didn't get enough from Jingo. So I think it's a bit like, people didn't understand from Jingo that war is very bad, so we'll just up this quite a bit. Was I think somebody's take on it, which seems reasonable. Yeah. But I think it's just because, like, it's not... So any book that's set in Ankh-Morpork might have an odd member or two of the City Watch in, but that was one where the City Watch have gone out, but it's more about the country they've gone to rather than them being in that country. Anyway, so starts with Guards, which is the 8th Discworld book and was published in 1989. This is where, so we won't, because these are mysteries. So we'll talk about, I think, the characters that are in it, because the cast kind of gets bigger, and we'll talk about how it progresses the theme, but we won't actually talk about the ending of any of the books because they're kind of mysteries. Because they're sort of police procedurals, but also they're about city and they're about, I think, policing living in a city that's changing and developing. Because, again, a lot of the thing about Ankh-Morpork is that it does develop over time. It starts out as this kind of like early modern-ish sort of setting in the Discworld.
I wouldn't say it's. I mean,
and it goes through
Guards is in Ankh-Morpork is much more of a sort of large. It's a large fantasy city.
Yeah.
Insofar as, but it's still.
But most fantasy cities are kind of early modern, but people say medieval.
Okay. I'm not going to argue with the history.
Well, no, I was just okay.
I mean, I kind of viewed it more as a sort of a bit closer. I suppose, yeah, traditionally medieval city.
Yeah, but if you think about changes that happen, then like within some years, and then also I guess, as I say, a lot of stuff people think of as medieval is actually early modern, but that's a whole separate conversation. Anyway, you've basically got this big bustling city that has been introduced in various previous Discworld books, and then it introduces the Captain Sam Vimes of the Night Watch, and the Night Watch is really, really rubbish, and Sam Vimes is basically a drunk who's spent his whole career trudging the streets at night, trying to stop crimes and stop fights, but then I think also being treated as a bit of a joke by the Day Watch, who I honestly don't remember that well. So this is the first one, but I didn't read till a bit later and I've only read it once. So, but basically a dragon appears in the city, and that's what's causing that and why, and there's stuff about just quite unpleasant characters.
Yes.
Who are small-minded doing things. And you're introduced to the main cast characters. So there's Sam Vimes, who at that point is captain. Then there's Sergeant Fred Colon and Corporal Nobby Nobbs. Fred Colon is kind of like your man in the street. He's like slightly chunky, of a certain age, likes a bit of a beer, believes stuff the man down the pub told him. He's probably kind of like your uncle who has slightly aggressive views or something. Or that kind of character. You know, he knows what he thinks about stuff, yes. He's not too bright, but he knows his job and he can get on with people and things like that. Nobby Nobbs is interesting. Throughout, he's always described as being human-ish. So it's always that Nobby... I think Nobby's kind of the fantasy trope of, like, the little hunched-over, slightly slimy, sneaky guy.
Yes.
Writ large, and then also that... So he is a watchman, to kind of effectively police, but he kind of steals stuff a lot, and you wouldn't trust him as far as you could throw him, and everyone's always a bit like, what is he? So I think it said that he's just quite grotesque in some way. He's never really described properly other than how people react to him. So I think it doesn't quite end up being ableist or anything. But it's like Nob is just this unfortunate... Like if there's a guy in a corner of a dungeon who's just like helping the dungeon people out and like nicking things, I guess that's him.
Yeah.
But and then comes onto the scene is a fresh-faced young man called Carrot, who was adopted by dwarves, who at this point are kind of a minority in the city, and they're kind of newly coming in. So the dwarves and trolls don't get on. That's more in the next book. And he's very fresh-faced, and he's this strapping 6-foot-tall guy. Is he red-haired? Is that what he's called? Carrot? Yeah. He's full of muscles. He's basically, you know, I think it's British, so you don't have to, but kind of like he'd look very all-American, I think, if that was the thing. They don't really have an American analog in the Discworld. And he turns up, and he's so naive that he arrests the head of the Thieves Guild for stealing. But the thing with Ankh-Morpork is that they have the Thieves Guild and the Beggars Guild and the Assassins Guild, and these things are all legal because they're in guilds. So yes, and then in the course of this whole thing with the dragon, Sam Vimes meets Lady Sybil Rankin, who is a very aristocratic lady of a certain age, who's on the large side and is very, very keen on swamp dragons, who are these little kind of creatures that live in swamps, and basically they create some sort of combustible stuff in them, and they basically explode a lot. So she's used to, so she's very aristocratic, also very practical because it's a hobby. So she's wearing like fireproof aprons and things, and basically they kind of have a bit of a romance but it's kind of they're both of a certain age, and neither of them is used to sharing their life with other people. And yes, so that's that one.
I think it's a as a starting point for that. It's obviously because it's one of the early ones.
Mm-hmm.
It's
working on the tropes.
It does stick with the tropes, So, and sort of as per Partchett in general, sort of not quite subverts, but certainly just doesn't take the straight view you're taking. I mean, Carrot's got a bit of a background that
we'll get into
that'll go into. It's more relevant later on. And the city is you've got all these guilds for and because I think that's quite a common fantasy trope of mercantile guilds and things, but Pratchett just takes it to the next level of there's a guild for pretty much everything except the firefighters guild because
which is a problem when a dragon comes along, because this is the thing, the dragon turns up isn't a little explodey swamp dragon, it's a massive, great big red fire baby dragon.
Proper dragon.
Fantasy dragon.
Yeah. Interestingly, if you played the first Discworld PC game, you pretty much know the plot to Guards, because it was the first piece of them.
You would have read the book, though, wouldn't you? If you were playing the game, would you not have read the book?
Well, yes, I've read the book first, but it's the game. The game does the plot, does the story.
Yeah, I meant like other people, but sure. Yeah. Okay.
Although you are Rincewind in it, so it's a little bit of an odd combination.
Oh, okay.
But it is much of the plot to Guards, Oh,
okay. Not playing any games.
Dragon. Sorry, there's a chanty bit at the start. So. But yes, so it's a good introduction to everything. You get a nice ensemble cast. You get to see this strange city of lots of characters, and you get more and more characters as you go along. So yeah, good one.
So the next one is Men at Arms, which is the 15th Discworld novel and was published in 1993. This is the one I think I started with. And I think I read Guards a bit later, so it felt like a backward step. In Men at Arms, so Sam Vimes is now the captain of the whole of the City Watch, not just the Night Watch section. I'm not referring to Day Watch, but I think they got dealt with in the previous
Day Watch, we don't talk about Day Watch.
Sure, that's fine. And what happens is that the City Watch now has to expand, and they're being forced to take on members of various communities that live in the city. So they take on a dwarf officer, a troll officer, and a female officer. So it's
sorry, it's like there's the communities that live in the city. We've got 100% trolls, 100% trolls, and we're dwarves, and we'll take a lady.
Well, the assumption is by some people that Angua gets hired because she's a lady. It turns out she's actually part of a slightly different community and just also happens to be a lady, but she's also the first lady. So in this, you've got the characters I mentioned before who are quite traditional. You're sort of like old sergeant type guy, and a captain who's kind of coming to terms with the fact that things are quite different now and stuff. And then you've also got a dwarf and a troll, which is the thing, because dwarves and trolls are kind of seen as hereditary enemies. Because dwarves like to mine, and trolls are kind of made of rock. So there have been historical... yes. Well, yes, they have diamond teeth, yes. That kind of comes up later, and in fact is a big thing much later.
Much later, yes.
But it's kind of again, it's an ongoing thing in the Discworld that dwarves and trolls don't get on. But then obviously their communities in this city. So it's this idea you've got these communities in what I think was initially a human city and now has more and more.
It's just a metropolitan. It's on a river, if you can call the Anchor River.
Sometimes you throw things in and they bounce.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those. Didn't
it used to be two cities? Because like Ankh Morpork, there was Ankh and Morpork, and one bit's posher than the other. There is. I think we have a map somewhere.
We have a map upstairs. Yeah. So yes, I mean it's a coastal. Well, trading city in theory.
I thought it was a bit further from the coast. I thought it was mostly the river, and then I think the plains as well. So it's kind of in the middle of this.
But it's a trading city. So,
it's very much an economic thing. In fact, this thing Partchett often says how like one group of people will move into an area, and then that just becomes normal, and then the next group of people move into a different area, and that's kind of how the city expands a bit.
Yeah.
So again, it's kind of based on, I think, a lot of sort of how cities are. So in this, and also Sam Vimes is getting ready to be married to Lady Sybil Rampkin, and so he's been given the title Sir Sam Vimes. He's been knighted. It's worth bearing in mind here that Ankh-Morpork is run by a dictatorial tyrant called the Patrician, called Lord Vetinari, who seems to be faintly omniscient. He always seems to know what's going on with everything, and Vimes has an ancestor who, old Stoneface Vimes, who was a regicide. It's not really gone into that much, but I think it's a little bit like if somebody was directly descended from Oliver Cromwell or something.
I think it's also thrown Carrot's background into it.
Yes, so that's the other thing that kind of starts, again, it comes up a little bit more in the book you didn't bring down. There's sort of the suggestion that Carrot Iron Founderson, a 6 foot tall a human man who was brought up by dwarfs and is therefore culturally dwarf, was possibly actually a descendant of the royal family of Ankh-Morpork. It's not kind of gone into so much, but as I say, he's a strapping guy. He's become a little less naive. He doesn't know how the city works, but Carrot is just this very kind of, as a clean-cut, pleasant guy. People like to talk to him. He knows everybody's name. He knows who everyone is. He chats to people so nicely and earnestly that they kind of go along with it, even if they're terribly unpleasant people. And then there's also new recruits. So there's Detritus the troll, Cuddy the dwarf, and then Angua, a woman, among other things. And yes, it's about these new recruits kind of figuring stuff out. Detritus and Cuddy have to kind of get over the hereditary dislike that their two species have for each other. Angua sort of starts a relationship with Carrot, because I also get the impression he's supposed to be incredibly handsome. Angua has lots of blonde hair, and that's the main thing I think we get told about.
Yeah, she's possibly not the most developed of...
Well, it's probably like with Nobby. It's just funny, like, it's just that Nobby's a caricature of being a bit gross, and she's a caricature of a pretty blonde lady. So, you know, I mean, Carrot's a caricature of, like, a big strapping lad.
That's a fair point.
And in this, people are being killed by something that seems like a... So, the technology level is kind of swords and crossbows. That seems to be like a crossbow, but more effective. And then, is this one with the stuff with the Fool's Guild? Or was that next?
No, I think
that's
you did.
Next.
It's been a long time since I read
There's stuff to do with the guilds and in the mystery and stuff, and then there's a certain amount of like trying to get things. Like there's kind of a deadline of Sam Vimes getting married to Lady Sybil. But there's this thing called the Gone, which seems to be this very effective.
I'm sure it's GNU.
Wouldn't it? Well, because there's GNE like in a different series.
Okay, I might be getting.
No, because it's GONNE. Gone.
Okay.
Which is this horrible weapon that sort of seems to be speaking to somebody, and this kind of goes a little bit like how moving pictures and stuff go in that there's something that's kind of clearly influenced from without the Discworld that seems to have the slightly extra magical power, but then the thing gets removed, and yes, that sort of deals with that. Yes. So this is the first one I read. I think it's mostly that it kind of introduced me to the setting and the characters.
Yeah.
And also at the point when you're getting some more characters in, it's kind of like the Watch is growing, but they're kind of being pushed to. And also, so at first everyone's like, oh, because Angua was a woman, but actually she's... should I mention it? Because it's going to be relevant to what later.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's actually a werewolf. So that's quite fun. I quite liked werewolves as well as a teenager, so reading a character that was one, so that's quite fun because so she can turn into a full actual wolf. So I think she doesn't really go like wolf person, like you know, furry, but still bipedal. She actually goes literally 4 legs.
Yeah.
Wolf.
Which, to be fair, is quite a useful skill for a member of the police.
Well, this is the thing. So she can smell really well, and actually it brings in Gaspo, doesn't it?
Yeah. Who
appeared in one of the early books as a talking dog. But no one believes he can talk, so he'll talk to humans all the time, but they think the voice is, they expect to be a dog. So he quite often goes, bark, bark, yes, yes, look at little doggy. Now, this is what you're thinking. So she talks to him because she can understand dogs. And I think there's stuff about the gangs of dogs in the city. Or is that the next one? I've read this one. I've read a few of these quite a few times when I was younger, so they probably blur together slightly.
I suppose in some respects the first three kind of they're all in so much the background is the watch.
That's true.
Building up,
it's not. Yeah, it's
becoming
not going to different places.
Actually, a
working
an actual
police
force. Yeah, but going from the it's like kind of night watchman.
Drunk in a gutter.
Yeah, the kind of that
vibes.
To actually an effective
modern
style police force in insofar as forensics and dealing things so it's easier. I think that I say in some respects that's much like a modern crime book in as far as you have you have the crime that's been investigated, but then also you have the background personal stuff. So the personal stuff of the either in this case the force, but in most other cases it's usually a single detective and will follow through to the series, whereas the actual cases are done and dusted.
I mean, it gets more like that later. I think with a lot of these you'll have a few different crimes, or something that doesn't seem like a crime but is weird, and then it turns up being significant later. Or a few crimes that are kind of connected by something. There's quite often shadowy figures in the background as well.
And then there's Lord Vetinari.
Well, yeah, but Lord Vetinari usually knows what was happening, but has to get Vimes to kind of investigate it legally and visibly and transparently. The other thing that's interesting with Angua is that although she turns into a werewolf, which I think that when you turn from being a human to a wolf, you are not wearing clothes. Because a wolf can't wear clothes, certainly not armour. Because all the Watchmen wear armour, so that they look like Watchmen. So, which is part of how her and Kara end up getting together. Although she says at one point, on the one hand, it's a little bit more awkward than being a male werewolf because you've got more places to cover. But on the other hand, is she a little bit more welcome than a naked man would be? Although again, I suppose it depends on where.
Well, true.
But yes. So, but that was quite fun. As I do like Angua as a character. Although obviously initially she's like the main female character, but then she was also turned to a wolf, and it's just fun.
Yeah. I can see that.
So the next book, which we don't have the actual book for, is Feet of Clay, which was the 19th Discworld novel. Is the 19th Discworld novel. It was published in 1996. So again, you've got more expansion of the City Watch. The fact that Angua is a werewolf, which was initially kind of kept quiet, is now... It's still kept quiet in the general public. So the people in the city generally know that the Watch has a werewolf, but they don't know who it is, and people tend to assume it's Nobby Nobbs because he doesn't look quite as human as people expect.
Well, who would think the pretty woman is the werewolf? Come on.
It depends if Angua's giving you a stare and growled at you.
That's a fair point, but
So that one you get more characters. I think that's where Cheery Little Boss turns up. So so they're getting more and more recruits. Sam Vimes gets yet another promotion. Because he's very much a lad who was raised on the streets in poverty. His wife is an aristocrat. So he's been knighted, but then he keeps being given more titles and he feels a bit like a class traitor. He's also being hunted down by the Assassin's Guild a lot, because obviously being the chief of police, basically, he kind of upsets a lot of people. Is he commander at this point?
Yes.
Yes. He goes from being captain to commander. Yeah, he upsets a lot of people, so a lot of people try to assassinate him, but he just has traps everywhere because he's super canny and wily and ruthless, which is an ongoing theme. So in Feet of Clay, there's a mystery which involves various things, but it involves golems, who are another kind of I say race in the city. Golems are basically big clay beings that have some paper in their head that tells them what to do. So they'll just hammer and hammer and hammer.
I just need to add, we do have Feet of Clay. We have badly organised bookshelves.
Yes, we definitely have it, because that's one of the ones I read quite a lot. Like that one, The Men of Arms, and Fifth Elephant, I read loads. So this whole thing with golems, and then again there's a load of crimes that don't seem to be connected, but something weird's happening. and somebody's poisoning Lord Vetinari.
Which, to be fair, is pretty brave.
Lord Vetinari, as well as being the he's the patrician of Ankh-Morpork. It's basically a system of one man, one vote, and that man is Lord Vetinari.
Yeah, he's the man. He has the vote.
Yeah, he graduated from the Assassin's Guild. Although most aristocratic men in the city seem to have some connection with the Assassin's Guild. And he's just this incredibly canny leader. And he there's some stuff to do with coats of arms that I recall, and some bad puns. There's also so Cheery Littlebottom comes. So she's a dwarf from a country called Ubervold, which is somewhere up in the mountains, and it's kind of like Germany / Russia / Eastern Europe. More on that later. And she turns up. I say she. Up till this point, every dwarf is man, because all dwarfs have beards, which I think is from Lord of the Rings. I think remember being mentioned in one of the films.
I mean, that's a pretty much...
It's that all dwarfs have beards. And the idea is kind of like the dwarf courtship largely invokes that they have beards, they wear leather, they have axes, they drink beer, they like gold, they eat rats on sticks. They make very good crossbows. And again, dwarfs are kind of a big economic factor in the city because they do a lot of the manufacturing. But basically all dwarves up to this point are he. And dwarf courtship usually involves, first of all, saving up a lot of money because there's a certain transactional thing about it that's part of dwarf culture. But also kind of having to check with each other as to what precisely is underneath the kind of layers of leather and if that kind of works for everyone. But no dwarves are she. Then Cheery comes along and ends up talking to Angua as another woman. Because Cheery is a female dwarf and would actually quite like to present as female, and she's living in this city where there are human women all around who are very femme, and Cheery kind of wants a piece of that action, but it's like super against being a dwarf. So Cheery's story is kind of an ongoing thing. There's also the fact that Cheery hates werewolves, so that's a thing for a while, and wears silver chainmail. Oh yes, that's the thing, obviously the silver thing, so Angua can't go near silver, but yes, so her and Carrot's relationship kind of develops a little bit, but it keeps on a fairly even keel, I think. There's not much.
It does.
There's stuff later, I think, more. But yeah, Cheery gets introduced to Watch, and she turns out to be quite good at forensics and looking at things, so it's not quite called forensics yet at this point. But yeah, so there's the golems, who are basically these big clay, sort of human-shaped beings, who are just basically treated as machines. They're just machinery. But then one of them starts trying to claim rights, and so that becomes the whole thing. And also, yeah, somebody's poisoning the patrician, and he probably knows who it is and exactly what's happening, but he needs Vimes to actually solve it. So yeah, he keeps giving him clues and stuff, and there's various things. I think, if not the proof on that one, there's stuff about the guilds again a bit. There's also stuff about coats of arms. There's a lot of stuff about how Carrot probably is the son of whatever the royal family of Ankh-Morpork is. It's never really mentioned in the history quite what happened. All you know is that Vimes' ancestor, Old Stoneface, killed the king, probably because the king was corrupt. This seems to be a thing that kind of echoes down through Vimes. He's very aware of it. And that Carrot probably is somehow, you know, the lost heir who got taken in by dwarves and raised by them. And I think some people are kind of, some very aristocratic, fancy old money, respecting bloodline over talent people are thinking, oh, well, we don't like this upshot Vetinari. We want things back to the old ways.
We can't control him, so
control that guy.
So we want someone we can control. Ooh, look! So a slightly naive, watchman kind of fits the.
Well, but then they put their attention on Nobby, don't they? Because he's much more controllable.
Yeah.
Because this is the thing. It seems like Carrot, even if he knows this, he doesn't seem to be interested. He's fine with his life as it is. And there's this whole stuff about, like, so a lot of these books have quite, you know, there's the police procedural aspect to it. There's the personal lives of the characters. They usually have a bit of a philosophical thing to them, quite often about the nature of policing, like, what is policing? How is it different from being a soldier? How should you behave towards civilians? How does the law operate? And
think of a few people that might be worth reading these on these bases.
I see a lot of people quoting stuff on the internet at the moment, and also having just read one. Again, there's lots of stuff about Sam Vimes, because Sam Vimes can be a low-down, ruthless, cunning bastard, but he obeys the law, and the law is the thing that, he feels is kind of his guiding principle. But it's kind of like, even if the written law doesn't say that, it's kind of the law of right and wrong. So he's got this very strong moral code that's like the law, and he's kind of policeman through and through. But he also doesn't like the idea of kings. And it's like, why do people, suddenly somebody has a crown and you're acting like the best of them, and you, like, why should people bend at the knees, sort of thing. So there's quite often an element, again, Pratchett books are very layered and multi-textured, so that's quite often a thread of that running through. Like, one of the things, I think it's actually in the first one, is the Vimes Boots theory of socio-economic inequality, which is basically where Vimes considers that he can only afford the cheapest boots possible. And there's lots of about Vimes using cheap boots to have cardboard soles and feeling the streets, and he can actually tell from the type of cobbles and things he walk on where he is in the city, even if it's dark or he's got his eyes closed. But he has to keep constantly buying the cheapest boots possible, so he spends a lot more as a poor person than a wealthy person who can buy a very good pair of boots once that lasts 10 years. And it's kind of like a wider point about things. So, but
very good point.
Yes. Well, yeah. So the next book is Jingo, which was the 21st Discworld book and came out in 1997, so just a year after Feet of Clay. Jingo's kind of the anti-war book until there's one later.
Until there's the other anti-war book.
I mean, it's called Jingo. I actually got to quote this in an A-level exam, because when you do the stuff about war, it's because it's a lot of stuff you do is about, like, First World War stuff, but they're like, you can just do other stuff that talks about war in general, and it's like, cool.
This is the one I actually saw as the play version.
Oh. How was that?
So if you most likely well, some people watching this may know that for a long time a small theatre in Abingdon, which is where I come from, used to basically do every year. There was a new Terry Partchett play when the book came out, and the Unicorn Theatre is tiny. Thank you for telling me that we're now live, Facebook. Yeah, it's really small. I mean, slightly bigger than our front room, but only just.
Oh, okay.
It is really, really small.
Like a studio sort of space?
No, it's part of it. It's in part of the not old Abbey bit, but some of the newer Abbey bit.
Oh, okay. I don't know if you showed me that.
No, I didn't. It wouldn't have been open. But yeah, it's very, very small. But every year, they got the rights to. They wrote the play and performed it. So this was surprisingly, I only ever got to one of them. But yeah, it was Jingo was the one I got to see. I'd say for a small theatre, I mean, the stage was next to nothing, and they had no sort of special effects or anything. It was all very, old school drama. Very good. Mm-hmm. But yeah, traditionally, Terry Partchett always got a complimentary seat for the Saturday matinee, which he usually turned up to. Cool. So, yeah.
I suppose you would, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, why not? But yes, it was a good. I enjoyed seeing that.
So, Jingo is where a piece of land appears in the sea, partway between Ankh-Morpork and Clatch. Now, Clatch is a country in Discworld that's across the sea. Clatch is kind of mostly the Middle East, or places with desert, but also kind of the Indian subcontinent.
It stands in for a lot.
Well, that's kind of how this one works. So, because previously, a lot of the stuff about, like, tensions in the city between different communities is kind of like stuff like dwarfs and trolls who've always kind of hated each other, and, and then the humans who just dislike all of them. This is the first one. It doesn't quite deal with race, because I think the Discworld's kind of, I think when it gets mentioned, it sort of says stuff about, like, oh, there are people, like, when you've got dwarfs and trolls who's looking at the colour of anyone's skin, which is a bit, it's one of those ones where, like, something serves as a metaphor, but then it kind of ignores the actual, addressing the actual thing. I'm just trying to check where this comes regarding one of the witches ones. It is after Witches Abroad, because I think that's the first one I actually mentioned the character was specifically black. Because they go to fancy New Orleans. But yes, so in this one you've got, and there's all this stuff about how, so both Clatch and Ankh-Morpork want to claim this little bit of land that kind of like popped up. And you've got a lot of stuff where suddenly, well, it's called Jingo, you've got lots of people who are, oh, well, we're, you know, the pride of Ankh-Morpork, and like, oh, not like Johnny Foreigner. And you've got the patrician who is obviously more into diplomacy and things like that, but then you've got a lot of like kind of hawkish aristocrats who, you know, served in the military because that's what their family did, and Lord Rust is one of the main ones of those. And so the City Watch having to kind of police this set of like people being uncomfortable, and it's kind of very much, well, it kind of addresses the way that I think, in a roundabout way, it's kind of like, I think, how British Asians are treated, and then also, I mean, it's 97, so it was before 9/11, but I'm sure Islamophobia was a thing then also, obviously. But yeah, so there's stuff like, because obviously there are a lot of Clatchian families who live in Ankh-Morpork, so there's a thing like where Vimes thinking about like curry, and he says, oh, you'll see a lad in the street, and you know his complexion just talks of like date trees and camels, but then he'll have a Morporkian accent you can float gravel on or something like that. So yeah, that's kind of what I took to be like, sort of going a little bit more specifically into like, yeah, humans are like different colours and different cultures, and also don't get on. It's not just dwarfs and trolls. Yeah. And then there's a lot of like ill feeling whipped up because there's like possible military action happening, but there's a lot of like how the Hawks are mostly just these blustering idiots and stuff. And then there's also the fact that a prince of Clatch comes for like a diplomatic visit. And Vimes being quite high up in city stuff now is supposed to lead the parade, and that goes a bit wrong. And then somebody tries to assassinate him, so Vimes starts investigating it as a crime. While also Vimes is very much trying to kind of like keep the peace, and like he's also trying to think a bit like, oh no, well the Clatchians are our guests, and like just because people are being like prejudiced against them, like Vimes obviously grew up with a lot of prejudice, but he's kind of aware of that, and he's kind of trying to work through it. And I think there are a lot of characters like that in Partchett. You know, they're kind of like in privileged groups, in some cases from actual, you know, very privileged positions in life, because Vimes grew up in poverty. But they're kind of aware they have prejudices, and they're kind of like wary of it, whilst also like knowing they're probably screwing up a bit. And at one point, there's this character called 71 Hour Ahmed, who's kind of like the Clatchian version of Vimes. At one point, he says, "No, no, Commander Vimes, you have to consider that. Give us the chance to be as ruthless, sneaky as the rest of you." So that's a vision. But that's one of the first ones of like the Watch goes on trip, because then there's a lot of the action moves over to Clatch because Vimes is pursuing somebody, and there's obviously a whole plot happening. There's also a fair bit of Lord Vetinari ends up kind of getting hold of Sergeant Colon and Corporal Nobbs and kind of making them go on the trip, and they're absolutely terrified of the man, but they kind of have to do what he says. But they're kind of like very dim in a specific way, so they have a lot of like conversations to each other, which usually has a certain amount of prejudice in. And like, oh, of course we're better, And it's like, oh, but they invented like algebra, and it's like, well, you know, and back and forth. But then usually Colon will say something a bit ignorant and uninformed, and nobody will question him on it enough that Colon kind of realises he doesn't know what he's saying, but just doubles down a bit, but he ends up looking a little bit foolish. So there's quite a few conversations like that. And they also have a certain kind of ignorance where they kind of go on tangents that even the patrician can't quite follow. So yeah, that's kind of that whole one. But yeah, it's very much like, isn't it stupid to kind of like suddenly dislike these people because there's a military action happening along where it doesn't actually affect you, and like turning against your neighbour because of these things. So
all over a bit of land that appeared in the middle of the sea, which was just damp. Because it would have been just damp. I mean, no use whatsoever, just damp. So yes, that's I think that one's got subtleties to it. If you're not careful, you might miss on the.
I think they all have to an extent, but I think this is where it starts building up more.
Yeah. Obviously, you know, using Colon and Nobbs as
foils.
Yeah, for the, to get to have people look at their own prejudices and why don't we get more people to read these books? It's
I mean, they were pretty popular, but yeah.
Thinking what the world might be like if everyone had read them and actually absorbed the message. But anyway.
Yes. Yeah, I think Terry Partchett had a keen sense of justice and unfairness and wrote about that a hell of a lot in what seemed like they're actually quite funny. Because this is the thing, they're all really funny.
I mean, I think certainly as you get later, I mean, the first few of each of the series are very much the
Finding the feet.
but lampooning they're playing off the tropes. But once he's established them with the tropes, he then takes them into a different. It takes them into a more in looking at holding a mirror up to the world and looking at how we look at things and how we to using a fantasy world to make us think twice about things. So, so yeah.
Yes. So the next one is Fifth Elephant, or The Fifth Elephant, which is the 24th Discworld book and came out in 1999. I think this between this and Feet of Clay is my favourite, although I think maybe it's this one because I've realised I can't remember a lot of the specifics of Feet. Wow. No, I do really like that one as well. Okay, I read a lot of these a long time ago. So the Fifth Elephant, Vimes and Lady Sybil are sent on a diplomatic trip to Uberwald, which, as I stated previously, is kind of Germany / Transylvania / Russia / kind of Eastern Europe, somewhere like it's cold and there are mountains. And he's sent with officers who come from there. So it's also, the Transylvania thing. It's also where the spooky stuff comes from. So Cheery Littlebottom gets sent because she's from the Dwarf Mines Commander Uberwald. And the reason Sergeant Detritus gets sent because he's a troll who's originally from Uberwald, who I think he'd lived in the city most of his life. Detritus actually originally turned up in soul music, didn't he?
Yes, because
then he gets before he joins the Watch. And then she's Sergeant at this point. Sergeant Anglia is supposed to go, but she kind of disappears right before they're due to go off. And the reason they're going is because the new Low King of the Dwarfs has been elected. So the dwarf communities in what might be called the natural habitat, which are the dwarf mines mostly in the mountains. So there's a big one in Copperhead, which I think is where Carrot comes from. And then Uberwald also has quite a big one. And the Low King is kind of, it's sort of like being High King, so each mine does their own thing. And then there's a lot of dwarf, obviously there's a massive dwarf community in Ankh-Morpork, and I think actually it's in this book they point out, or maybe one of the later ones, that Ankh-Morpork's actually the biggest dwarf city, because that's where so many dwarfs are. But it's kind of thing where a lot of dwarfs go there, work in Ankh-Morpork, work in manufactories, and then send money home to the mountains, because that's back home. So it's kind of like, again, very kind of immigrant sort of story. So the Low King's it's kind of partly a ceremonial position, but also an incredibly important one, because the policies the king come up with decides what dwarfism is. Dwarfism, that's the actual illness, but being a dwarf. And then there's kind of the deep dark down dwarves. So you get some dwarves in Ankh-Morpork who don't actually ever see humans, and they all live under the cellars, because Ankh-Morpork is kind of built on older versions of the city, so a lot of it's cellars going down of older buildings. And these dwarfs kind of like cover themselves up, so they cover themselves up and they don't let humans see them, they don't see the sun, because they believe that being a dwarf is about being deep in the dark. Again, I feel like that's probably a metaphor for some stuff.
Yeah.
Because you've got this community of dwarfs who people see around, and you've got the inner community of them that you don't see because they don't integrate or mix, and they're actually very against that. And then, so Cheery Littlebottom's being sent, but she's very controversial because she's a she, and she's actually found other dwarfs who also want to identify as female and dress a bit feminine, while still, I think, being fairly dwarfish. And still retaining their beards, because they're still dwarfs.
Chainmail,
yeah.
And, it's just.
But it's just more feminine.
Makeup and.
Yeah, and skirts.
Yeah.
High heels a bit, but yes, but still like mining boots.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of axes. but maybe like a small one to go with an evening wear. So yeah, they're going on this diplomatic thing because the Low King's being crowned. But then what happens is that the sort of dwarf holy artifact, the Scone of Stone, which is very much a reference to some British stuff, is stolen. And how could such a thing happen? Well, Sam Vimes is there, so he's on the case. And then it turns out that there's a lot of stuff going on. So Ubervold also has vampires, and Sam Vimes can't stand vampires. It's also where the werewolves come from. So Angie was supposed to go with them. She disappears. Carrot gets worried and doesn't know why, because he's been left in charge in Aunt Morpork. So he recruits Gaspo, the talking dog, to help him track Angua, because he can smell her. And turns out Angua's run off with a male wolf. Just a wolf, but very male. And is going back to Ubervold because there's some stuff with her family, who are werewolves, and also her mother is a countess. Yes, I think so. Because it turns out she's got some family stuff that isn't great, and a brother who's a bit deeply unpleasant.
Yes.
Quite a lot of the watch books as you go along will have a character who's deeply, deeply unpleasant, who's kind of the antagonist, but there's other stuff happening around them. And yet, so the dwarf stuff gets stolen, and then Vimes investigating that, but it's all very political, and he's kind of blundering into this whole political landscape he doesn't know. Meanwhile, Lady Sybil, his wife, who's is she a duchess at this point? Does he get made a duke?
I think he
gets made a duke in order to go.
Yeah, he gets promoted every book.
Well, they stop. No, I think Duke of Ank is where it stops.
Yeah, they've run out. Yeah, fair point. They do run out of titles to give him.
But yeah, so she's very diplomatic, and she's very diplomatic. She's aristocracy, but she also cares about people, so she knows a lot about everyone. Like, she went to school with Angua's mother, so she knows her, and she knows about dwarf opera, and then she performs. So everyone's very impressed because the thing with Lady Sybil is that she's she's obviously like kind of big, which is the whole point. But that, I think, is quite good for opera. But yes. That's why. Again, that's part of how she is. Like she was a big girl who became a big woman, so she tried to make herself a bit smaller and quite pleasant, so people would get on with her. But yes, she kind of gets involved in things a bit as well, and Vimes ends up going on this chase. And there's lots of these references to things, like there's references to Chekhov, and there's references to this and that. We also get introduced to the Igors. Igors have lisps, and they always work for a master or master. And they tend to be very, like, they like to lend a hand. Whose hand was it? We don't know. But they had the hands in the back, so it was available. And in Ubervold, if anyone, like, there's a lot of lumberjacks, if people, like, lose legs, then an eagle will come and stitch them up. And it's kind of the whole kind of Frankenstein-y thing, but, like, the assistant. But eagles are, like, again, a whole kind of race or species of people who do that. And again, they get introduced in this because every house has an eagle, and they can always appear behind you without you understanding how they got there. Things like this. So again, it's taking a sort of horror movie kind of trope and playing with it a lot, but kind of putting it as a thing that's actually a group of people. I really like Fifth Elephant. I think it's because you have like a lot more about the dwarfs, and there's quite a bit of politics involved there, and there's sort of background stuff as well, and also the fact that you've got a big community. Like a massive community, or I suppose a race of or species of people who are in different locations and have different ideas. And like, is the new leader going to be regressive or progressive? And how do those that oppose that kind of work within that community, but without kind of still presenting a united face outside? And the fact that, like, there's lots of stuff about what it actually means to be a dwarf, and Sam Vimes does a lot of stuff that's absolutely, I say sacrilegious, they kind of don't have a religion, their religion is being a dwarf. There's a lot of stuff that be sacrilegious, and they can't understand him, and he doesn't quite really understand them, even though he works with a lot of people who are dwarfs or were raised dwarf. So, yeah. Actually, again, it's got quite a bit to it. And then there's also kind of like stuff about Carrot and Angua's relationship. There's kind of, perhaps it's very subtle with romantic stuff, so it's kind of like,
yeah, I think
it's like there'll be stuff happening, and you'll kind of see how it's developing, but it's never like the main focus. But
yeah, you kind of. This
is going to be a long one, but there are a lot of books.
Yeah. So certainly Carrot and Angua, that you don't ever have this big romance book or plot for them. It's just kind of they are in a relationship, and
Well, there's the fact that, like, because doesn't Angela get kidnapped in Jingo at one point, or she gets taken, and Carrot is going after her then, but he still sleeps because it's a sensible thing to do, and Vimes is like, but what? But then in this, there's obviously stuff with Angela dealing with the fact that she's a werewolf and he's a human, and they live in human society, and how he doesn't understand her, but, like, maybe this wolf that she used to know gets another part of her that he doesn't. There's also the fact that when Carrot runs off to follow Angua, Fred Colon gets left in charge of the City Watch, and it does not go well. He's like nature's sergeant. He shouldn't be a captain or a commander, and he starts getting very worried about things, and there's almost a mutiny.
Gotta feel sorry for her.
Yeah, he promoted far above his means, and just like starts getting a bit paranoid about stuff. Okay, we're nearly there.
We're getting there.
Okay, Night Watch is the 29th Discworld book and was published in 2002. This is the one that a lot of people really, really love, and it is very impressive. And I don't know if you can see from the cover, but it's kind of based on that Rembrandt picture of the same name, which is also actually on the back. It's probably not very clear on the screen.
And also backwards.
That too. So this I think is where the books start to shift from being quite so ensemble and being a bit like Sam Vimes is in all of them, he's a viewpoint character in all of them. I mean, Partchett does a sort of semi-omniscient narration thing anyway, where he moves around different people. But this is where it very much turns into all about Sam Vimes and the people he works with, whereas before it was a bit more like, oh, Carrot's kind of like the main character, or could be the main character. He certainly fits the hero mould. And yeah. Whilst chasing a psychopath, Sam Vimes falls through the roof of the Library of the Unseen University, which is pretty magical, and ends up back in time. And this is on the anniversary of something that a lot of the older people in the Watch, or who were around, refer to as, is it the Glorious 25th? I should have checked.
Something like that.
It does not say. Yeah, basically, Vimes ends up accidentally going back to his own past at a point when there was a sort of weird little revolution in Ankh-Morpork. What is described here as the Tale of One City. So it's obviously based on Tale of Two Cities, which I admittedly have not read. But it's kind of this idea of, like, he goes back and ends up looking like the man who taught the younger him how to be a good police officer during this big revolution. And there's this thing where everyone wears lilac, and you had to be there, remember, and then somebody who's new to the Watch goes, should I be doing this too? And they're like, were you there? It's like, was I where? It's like, you weren't there, you don't know. So there's obviously this big thing. So it's kind of like the start of the book is building up to this big thing that's commemoration of something, but the reader doesn't know what, and then he ends up going back. This also involves the history monks, who are the time-travelling Tibetan guys. I think we kind of, Tibetanish guys, who I think we kind of mentioned in the Deaf ones, because this one came after The Thief of Time. So Lutzi is in that. And it's basically back to this kind of dark time in Ankh-Morpork history where there was a different tyrant in the palace who, yeah, like, people would be disappeared by the Watch all the time. Young Sam Vimes. Can you call him Young Sam? Because that's a different character. The younger Sam Vimes has just become a police officer, and he's watching other officers take bribes, turn the other way when people disappeared. There's this nasty group of people who are in the Watch, and they kind of take orders directly from the current ruler, who everyone says is mad. There's also young Vetinari, so you see how he was when he actually was at the Assassin's Guild. He was quite terrifying then. You see Red Shoe, who is in some of the previous books, as a zombie officer, who again I think was first appeared in one of the Death books. You sort of see how he became a zombie in the first book. There's this one bit, the Glorious Republic of Treacle Mine Road, and there's barricades and this whole thing, and Sam Vimes is having to keep his past self alive, try and teach them lessons that he sort of remembers being taught. Also, in the present, Lady Sybil is actually giving birth to their child, because although they're both of a certain age, Sybil is from aristocratic stock that's built for breeding, I think is how they described it. So she's an older mother, but yeah. So he's got this present he desperately wants to get back to and preserve, but he also wants to do what he knows needs doing there. So at first he's trying to preserve the timeline, but he knows now the injustices that are happening. It's very difficult for him to deal with that. And there's just a lot of very, like, it's quite not interesting. There's also the fact that the psychopath who's chasing has gone back into the past. So that's not great. So yeah, there's kind of a lot of stuff about, like sort of these small revolutionary things. People have a cause that's quite short-lived but very passionate. You've got stuff about, like, how to behave when you've got an oppressive regime happening. What can good people do in that? So there's quite meaty stuff in there. It's very, it's very impressive. You've got Nobby Nobbs as a small child. But again, it's kind of stripped back because you've got, like, younger versions of the kind of earlier characters, and then you've got some... Or, like, the fact that, like, Vimes accidentally gives Cut Me Own Throat Dibbler his name.
Yes. Because
he just says, oh, that's... Like, there's lots of, like, earlier versions of Ankh-Morpork regulars from this series and other books, so that's quite an interesting thing. It's kind of like taking back up the time stuff. So yeah, that's pretty neat and stuff. Right, we're getting there now.
We're down to the last two.
Honourable mention to Monstrous Regiment, which was published the year after Night Watch. Sam Vimes is in it, and they're kind of involved in a war in some sort of small country that no one really cares about, that's horrendously war-torn, but it's mostly about how, like, war is actually terrible, and also about women. So Vimes is in it briefly, and so is Angel. Okay, so the next one is Thud, which is the 34th Discworld book and was published in 2005. Thud is where the whole kind of animosity between dwarfs and trolls becomes a big thing.
Again.
Yeah, but it's kind of where it gets resolved, I suppose. Yeah. Like, they're a bit like, why have they always hated each other? Well, the dwarves say this, and the trolls say that, and the creation myth of both races says, or species says, oh, we've always done this. It's like, have we always done this? And then there's this big thing called the Battle of Coombe Valley. So Coombe Valley Day is this big nightmare for the police, because the trolls have a parade, and the dwarves have a parade, and the parades must not meet, and that's also a reference to some things. And then there's the fact that, like, the Watch has dwarves and trolls in, and normally they're all watchmen, but suddenly, well, they're dwarves and they're trolls. And there's stuff to do with a big painting of this battle, and there were supposed to be loads of battles, and then Vimes is also doing the fact that he's now a father to a small child, and every day at 6 p.m, without fail, he must be at his home to read a book called Where's My Cow to his son. That is actually a book we have upstairs. They published the book a bit, although it kind of goes from being a man reading a book to his son about farm animals, being a bit like, but he lives in the city, he's only going to see these on a plate, so then it starts being about the street people of Ankh-Morpork.
Where's my cow? Is that my cow? No, it's foul old Ron.
Yeah, it's not entirely kid. It's mostly kid friendly, but you might just have to ignore some.
To be honest, it's full of references that they wouldn't get anyway.
Yeah.
So,
our son's flicked through it, so yeah. But yeah, so there's this whole thing with that, and then and it's quite ridiculous because the whole watch knows that. So if there's traffic, if there is traffic when Sam Vimes needs to get home, that traffic is moved and he is taken. So it's kind of abusing his position as chief of the police to an extent. But it's kind of in a comical way. And it's sort of this idea that, like, oh, if you make an excuse to miss it once for a good reason, well, then everything becomes a good reason. So, yeah, he's kind of doing the fact that he's like a father now and the responsibilities that brings. But there's also stuff about, so there's all this tension between dwarfs and trolls, and then the people who aren't either of those groups are like, oh, this is causing so much trouble, but there's, like, a lot behind it. There's also this game that's called Thud, which seems to be kind of like a war game, that you've got, like, dwarf and troll pieces that can do different things, different ways of playing it. So the Patrician, Lord Veterinary, plays it, and then a lot of people playing it sort of seems to tie in stuff. There's also the fact that
don't know. Can I help you?
There's also the fact that the Watch has had to now hire its first vampire officer. Vimes has always been insistent that he wouldn't have vampires in the Watch. There's a lot of blood involved and he doesn't trust them. So again, it's like Vimes is aware that he's prejudiced about things, but that doesn't mean his prejudices disappear. But previous books set in Ankh-Morpork have had characters from the Temperance, the Black Ribboners, which is like the Vampire Temperance League. So they don't drink blood. But blood still has an effect on them because they are vampires. So, yeah, it's that. And there's also the fact that... So another... so Sally is hired as a vampire officer. And then there's weird stuff with her and Angua, because again, there's kind of this idea that, well, you've got dwarves and trolls, a big thing, that werewolves and vampires have a bit of a thing, and Angua, despite trying to be professional, because she is a sergeant, and Sally is just a lance constable, or a constable. There's also the fact that Angua has this thing, she's like, oh, because vampires are undead, but they're all glamorous, and everyone likes them, but werewolves are not treated as nicely, so she's got a bit of a chip on her shoulder about that, and she knows it, but she still feels it. Yeah. There's also the fact that Sally kind of admits she's attracted to Carrot, I think, before she realised that Carrot is with Angua, and then they end up having to go, investigate stuff. So again, you've got the kind of thing where there's various crimes happening and there's a bigger thing going on. And in this, Sybil again turns out to be useful. It turns out there's this old painting. It's a little bit Da Vinci Code that. You got this old painting and like the painter went mad, but there are supposed to be all these kind of clues in the pictures and stuff. But the painting gets stolen. But Sybil literally traced it because her family had donated it to the museum in the first place. So as a child, she traced it and has a tracing somewhere. And then they go to this place where this battle's supposed to take place because there's clearly some sort of mystery there. And there's this whole stuff about how dwarfs and trolls continued being enemies and stuff. So yes, there's also a bit where Vimes... There's also... This one gets a little supernatural, more so than just being in Discworld, in that there's kind of these symbols that mean very important things to dwarves, and Vimes kind of gets one on him and it becomes a bit of a thing. Right, last one. Right, Snuff. Perhaps we're just going with like short words at this point. I mean, in both Thud certainly there's Thud, there's noises, there's the game called Thud, and Snuff a little bit has this. So Snuff is the 39th Discworld book, was published in 2011. Sam Vimes, who's now the father of a 6-year-old, so it's a few years after Thud, has to go to the countryside. See, he has country estates, because Sybil basically signed over all of her lands to him, because she's an aristocrat and he married her, and he's just never interested and doesn't know what to do with it. But they have to go on a holiday, and it has been agreed that he is going on a holiday. So they go to the countryside. Bear in mind that the countryside's never been mentioned before, because it kind of seems like from other books, around Ankh-Morpork is just the plains, which is mostly cabbage fields. But there's also some sort of countryside bit that's basically kind of like, well, the sort of rural bit of England that we both come from.
I'd imagine the history monks just dropped it in when they needed it.
This is true. That's, perhaps get the history monks, but like anything that's anachronistic or doesn't make any sense is fine. Yeah, so it's where all the posh people have their country homes, and Sybil hasn't been there in years, but she used to go there all the time as a child, and she wants her son, who's called Young Sam, to go and learn about this farming and stuff. There's also a river called Old Treachery, which has these paddle boats that go up and down it. And there's a lot of posh people, and then all the kind of people who aren't posh around there are labourers who go to the village pub, and there's a lot of forelock tugging and stuff, and Vimes doesn't like it. There's also stuff with goblins. Goblins are vermin. Everyone knows goblins are vermin. They're weird verminous creatures that live in caves and collect their own, like, excretions. The things that come out of the body. And they're a bit gross, and no one likes them. In Ankh-Morpork, if they're around at all, they're basically working for the guy that collects the night soil. And Vice never really thought about it very much, but then when you go to the countryside, you realise this stuff's up. There's something going on. Now, in this book, you get a little bit more. I think also proves my point. You get a bit more about Lord Vetinari, because I think in other Ankh-Morpork books, Vetinari becomes more of a character, and you can spend more time with him and in his head. So he's becoming more of like, rather than just this figure who is pulling the strings behind the scenes and knows everything, but has to kind of like get it public without him just acting on it. Through the newspaper books and the Moist One Liquid books, Vetinari becomes more and more of a character who's doing stuff, and you kind of see a bit more of his emotional state and stuff, and whatever is going on with him and the crossword lady, because this is the one I've only just finished reading. So Vimes goes to the country. There's a couple of bits where it's like, oh, this is like Austin, but with Sam Vimes in it. It's like Sybil visits a friend who has 5 daughters who need to be married at some point, because unfortunately they're waiting for a cousin to die, or they're going to be, destitute, so they don't have dowries and stuff, and he's just there like, why would you need to pay somebody to marry you? You're all like nice young women, It's like, what is it you actually do? Like, do? What do you mean do? It's like, well, don't you go and do anything? So one sister is in disgrace and is somewhere away being a lumberjack. There's another sister who has an odd look in her eye and likes writing, and is called Jane. Also, at this point, he's wearing breeches, which he doesn't enjoy, and they're talking about balls and bonnets a lot, and it's like, oh, this is just a random Austen bit. That's quite funny. Particularly as he kind of invents the thriller genre, which he's in. It's like, well, what if you wrote a story about a man who had to catch criminals, but also had to kind of like think like criminals and what that does to him, which is basically the theme of Sam Vimes. Because there's always points in the books where where Vimes is confronting someone who's basically a stone cold killer, who's a psychopath, who has no morals and will just attack. And there's always a moment where he's a bit like, I know I could be like you, but something's holding me back. This is very much a thing in Snuff. Since events in Thud, Vimes may have developed some slightly supernatural skills that help him. But the stuff with the goblins is the goblins are about, and he discovers that a few years ago, a load were rounded up and taken somewhere, and no one said anything because they're vermin, aren't they? But he kind of interacts with them more and realises they're not quite the simple, stupid creatures that were thought, and they do actually have culture, they have ideas and stuff to them. He also meets the local police officer who just answers to the magistrates, which is just a group of rich people who decide what the law is locally. Sam Vimes does not like people deciding what the law is. The law is the thing he seems very sure about. Although I think his idea of the law is basically his idea of what's right and wrong. So he kind of teaches the local sort of young police officer that actually he doesn't have to just be enthralled to what his superiors tell him. He has a wide responsibility as kind of a force for good. And I think this is the book where it says something about, like, people say civilians and policemen, but policemen aren't soldiers, and that's important.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's why a lot of this stuff is being quoted on the internet at the moment, you know. Because there's a lot of stuff about, like, I guess community policing and like doing what you're doing not just to keep the peace. That is what the rich, privileged folk want, but is in fact the peace for a whole community. So serving the community as well as just, and also like protecting even the most wretched members of a community that everyone else would say, well, they don't have rights, they don't count. So yeah. So there's quite a lot of powerful stuff. I think with this one, it felt a little bit less multi-layered than something new, but I think the later ones did. But in fairness, we know the author had a degenerative illness, so, you know.
Yeah, I think...
Not too surprising, but it was still pretty good. There's a riverboat chase and a lot of quite dramatic stuff happening. And also a 6-year-old who's obsessed with poo. And there's an author of a book, and she wrote a book all about poo, and kids love that, so...
I mean, when I read this, I kind of rolled my eyes at the whole thing because you know, what children and poo, you know, that's just annoying. Yeah, it turns out that as best you might try, poo is still funny to them.
Well, I suppose. But I mean, to get older, but like you have to go through a phase where you have to talk about quite a lot, just so they know what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, I know that's the kind of what we. But on the other hand,
also it's the kind of humour that like it's not. Like nice, but a lot of adults still fine with scatological stuff, and also it's fairly safe. It's you know those are things to be joking about. So.
Anyway, well, I was going to say that. So yeah, I think certainly from sort of in between sort of Fifth Elephant to Night Watch, they do get a lot more heavier on the what's what I'm looking for, sort of
times.
No.
Okay.
Sort of holding a mirror up very much to, you know, so...
I think there was a bit of that
It was a bit of that earlier on, but it's kind of, you know, it's as it's developed, I think that's kind of a telling point. That's very much a shift.
I think it goes along with the Vimes stuff, though, because the whole point of Vimes, I say, in every one of those books, everyone there's like at least one very unpleasant character. But Vimes always has to go up against somebody who's as much a bastard as him, and the difference is, like, he knows he's a killer. Like, in this one, there's a lot of him focusing about that he is a killer, and he is a bastard, and he does, like, know how bad people think, but does that make him different to them?
Yeah.
And I think he worries that he isn't different enough and holds the law up as, like, a shield, almost. And again, there's kind of a lot of that in the Third, like the inner policeman.
Yeah,
I think that's also why it becomes a bit more Vimes focused, because it's kind of using one man and his psyche kind of as an exploration.
I just think it's certainly, and I think even across the other series, I think it's generally around that sort of point that Pratchett starts using the books. I tend to find that while they're all fun and funny, those aren't as laugh out loud funny for me.
I think there's moments, but yeah, you're right. It's less. I think the humour
evolves.
Evolves. I mean, some of it's kind of based on already knowing the references to all the Discworld stuff. But yeah, no, I can kind of see that.
It's because it's not so much using the tropes of fantasy anymore. It's using its own world to then
look at ours.
Yeah,
and explain stuff often as well.
And I think certainly from about Fifth Elephant onwards, it's definitely,
I think Fifth Elephant's the last one I considered to be like truly an ensemble, and then the others it's like rhymes, and then you do get the viewpoints for the characters that obviously drive the plot because there are mysteries and because there are people finding different things that then have to come together to solve the mystery. But yeah, it's very much more focused on Vimes rather than being an ensemble at that point. So, but like I say, I think that's Vimes is used as the exploration of a lot of things.
Yeah, nice.
Do you have a favourite one?
I think I like the earlier ones better. Yeah, I say. Well, I appreciate Night Watch, and I've got a definite soft spot for the Monks of Time. I think, if anything, possibly Guards.
Oh, see, I think because I read Men at Arms first, and I didn't read Guards until afterwards. So at that point, like everyone already moved on a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think my favourite's probably Fifth Elephant. I was kind of between that and Feet of Clay, and maybe Feet of Clay is losing out because it's not physically here.
That's fair enough.
I do kind of that one. I think because that kind of started with because in that it's like the golems are the ones who like. Are they people? Are they not people? Laws don't apply to them, but if they are people, then laws do apply to them. But so do right, like they have rights, which is kind of a thing. It's massively a thing in Snuff, isn't it? So there's a bit of that, and I think that one was again the mystery. I remember about how that comes together is quite because a lot of them are very the mysteries. There's a lot of separate stuff that kind of comes together in like odd ways, which I think obviously is a good mystery thing. I think. Fifth Elephant just edges it out.
Oh, that's right.
Don't know if it's because there's a lot of werewolves. So the werewolves aren't very nice in it mostly, but then I guess the dwarf stuff's quite interesting, and also Sybil comes into her own more because before that she kind of been like, Well, I mean, she had quite an important role, but she's kind of like Sam's wife, and I mean in Snuff she has quite an important role, but she's kind of like the wife and mother. But I think in Fifth Elephant she actually gets to go on one of the trips somewhere.
Yeah.
And actually her being all diplomatic and stuff is really useful, and she knows lots of bits and pieces about dwarf culture because she's actually very well educated and stuff.
I think I'll need to at some point read not all of them again, but I think I've only read Night Watch onwards at least only once, so I need to at some point go back and.
I think because I've listened to some of the Marcus Shiro videos of them, so I kind of like revisited. Some like Night Watch and Thud. Stuff.
Yeah, but I think they're another. I mean, the Discworld series as a whole is well worth reading. So there's very few. I mean, a poor Discworld book is an average book in general. So
I think it's interesting how people have quite a lot of different favourites and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think it also depends on when you read them, what order. Again, I think Feet of Clay and Fifth Elephant were ones I read at the point when I would reread stuff quite a lot, which I think. Really do so much now.
I'll just have too much to read at this point.
And a lot of things to do.
Yes, that's life. So, well, I have to mention it, and Manuel can put fingers in his ears now. Obviously, there is the Watch TV show coming at some point.
Yeah, it felt vaguely topical to do this as well as me reading books. I haven't seen the trailer online. I just saw a lot of people having reactions to the trailer online.
Obviously, it is. If you have seen the trailer. You know that it's, and know Discworld relatively well, that there is a slight disconnect between the two. I'm waiting for the large caps lock text in the comments at any moment. I don't know.
It does look like it's a different beast, doesn't it?
A trailer's a trailer, and I've been fooled by trailers before, but usually the other way round. Damn you, X-Men 3.
We had that therapy already. We did that intervention.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think
parts of it look
cool.
alright and interesting.
I think it looks interesting, but then because it's like saying it's Discworld Watch, like this is very different to the stuff we know and love, and maybe if it'd been something with a different name, but it's interesting. So I saw a lot of people saying this doesn't seem to be like the books. I think the people have gone from saying it's an adaptation to like it's loosely based on, so like we're just going with the spirit of it. I think it's taking some of the like kind of maverick cop tropes, which I mean I think Vimes had initially, but doesn't have later on, and it doesn't always work for him because like. Oh, there's a bit where Veterinary says Vimes manages to be anti-authoritarian whilst being in authority, and there's kind of that streak to him. But he's not like, oh, you know, like handing your gun, your badge stuff. You can't be a maverick if you're the chief of police, but somehow he kind of manages it, but like in an interesting way, not just in sort of like I don't play by the rules, because as we've discussed, the rules are the thing that Vimes believes keeps him from being like a psychopath, which I think is him. Is more about his perception of himself than actually how he is. But
so I don't. Well, you've
I've seen the character. I haven't seen the trailer, but I've seen the previous shots where they did the casting.
Well, it was also they had. I saw some other clips. They released 3 other clips, and one of them was brings Vimes up with collection coffee.
Yes, that's been mentioned,
and that kind of worked.
Yes.
You know. Yes, Cheery was there, which she wasn't in the original. But you know, we
kind of didn't mention it. It's within the first book. Vimes is a drunk, and then after that, he's sober, and occasionally it becomes a thing. There's a bit in Snuff actually where somebody thinks he's drunk cocktails, and I'm there going, "Well, this is clearly not right, is it? Because he wouldn't have drunk cocktails. He's been sober for most of these books, even when it's a struggle."
So that bit played out. You know,
I think you can take things from it.
So that looks, but on the other hand, the way Vimes seems to be in the trailer, I just can't see him
with this guy.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's a very different. I think
they also had. Yeah, what I hear about Lady Sybil is that they cast a young black woman as Lady Sybil, and I mean, her being black is cool. Her being young and not fat though is like, no. The whole thing with Sybil is that she's, you know, a certain girth and a certain age sort of thing. Like she is an older woman, and you know, and like also I think it had her being like, oh, she's now scrap also a thief, and it's like, no, that's not really how Sybil is. And Sybil's one of those few characters who's like an older woman who like she's a wife and a mother and practical and gets things done, but it's also actually pretty cool in the books and it's kind of like the backbone to Vimes' life.
The bits of Sybil in it is I'm looking at going.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of concern on people and people being a bit like, this isn't what we were hoping for or wanted. But then, on the other hand, it is like fantasy on TV, so you kind of want to support it in general.
Yeah.
I did also see somebody point out, so, like I said, Cheery in the books is in a culture where everyone is effectively male, and she identifies as she, and starts a trend of more people identifying as she, and being femme. So it's kind of introducing femininity to a very almost strictly masculine society. What they've done in the TV series is they've actually kind of made the character non-binary, and the character's they're being played by a non-binary actor, and I think there's also a non-binary writer on the staff. So I did see somebody say that's actually the first time that you've had like character, actor, and a writer all be non-binary. So hope it's like a good representation for that, although it is obviously different to the books.
She's not a dwarf.
Well, yeah, okay, she's not a dwarf with a beard. It's but I think they're obviously changing stuff like that. I know, I know she's not like a fancy dwarf. I think they've taken some of the more big scale, like the more sort of fancy stuff that was the original DNA of it out, maybe. But I think the point is that Cheery as a character is a way of talking about different gendered stuff.
I just say she's only very briefly in the one clip, so it's difficult to say.
But yeah, you're right. It's obviously human.
I think it's going to be one of those things where perhaps as a show, if it wasn't Discworld related, it might be okay, reasonable. But because it's
attached to this much loved property
with connections, it's going to be judged by that, and it can't avoid that. And I think that's going to hurt it because it's going to be very different. And so we'll see.
I mean, I suppose the other, because they've not done a watch TV adaptation, have they? Because they've done Hogfather, Going Postal, and then the first two, which I haven't actually seen.
No, I haven't either.
They're on Sky.
Yeah.
I mean, the other ones were, but we saw those. Which I had, like, some of the Watch characters are in that as, like, Ankh-Morpork people, but they weren't in it, like, loads.
So, yeah, this will be an interesting one. Yeah, I can't see that. I just can't see it. Yeah, it's gonna.
Can't see it being what you want it to be.
No,
it's a lot of people's problems.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, there are strong feelings and strong visualizations about.
I think this is quite. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, about the characters, and I think they've. I don't.
They've changed it too much.
I don't know. Well, it's difficult to say from the trailer.
Like they've changed it too much.
I mean, it's. I mean, Carrot looks Carrot-esque.
He'd be one of the easiest ones, though, wouldn't he?
And again, but they're not doing the. They're not just going to follow the plots of the books. The elements of the books are in there, so certainly there is a dragon in the trailer.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, there's going to be, but obviously they've introduced a lot more of the earlier characters in. So obviously the Watch is going to be a bit more of a organised. Yeah. You're not going to have the Watch developing across the series as it does. It's going to be it's.
That's kind of longer term.
So
yeah.
It's got. No, I think the whole point's going to start.
Yeah,
so it's. We will see. It will be interesting to see how that goes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think also the Watch series or sub-series is one of the ones that, because there's quite a lot of texture to it and variety and things, it's one of the ones people, you know, are quite attached to because there's so many of them.
I think it's got, because again, there are much more ensemble casts with characters that develop over the series.
Even some of the more minor characters, you know, that only get mentioned a little bit or a slight tangential plot still, kind of develop through it, which the general Ankh-Morpork thing as well, I suppose.
Yeah. So, but anyway, a good series. As you know, we're Discworld fans, so go read them. How did you do with your cutting out?
I cut out various things. It's Christmas tree, there's some Christmas dogs, another Christmas tree, a Christmas penguin. Yeah.
I have a pair of arms.
Well, that's good to know.
Yes. And they're very, very bendy. Which is very good as well. Next time I should be working on the shoulder units.
I feel like this cutting out was a bit more successful than the Spider-Man thing, but...
That's fair enough.
I just chose the Spider-Man comic at random. I probably should have thought that through. I need to actually consider what I'm doing for sewing properly at some point. But yes, I'll get back into that.
That involves us thinking ahead. And to be honest, these days it doesn't seem worth thinking too far ahead. Because... who knows? Yeah. Anyway, thank you for watching.
Yes, thank you.
Especially if you've managed... Ooh, it's 10 past 10. Yeah, we've
gone quite late. There's just so many books we should have split into.
Thank you if you're still watching. If not, I hope you catch up on YouTube. I'll try and get this up relatively quickly.
With the other ones as well.
With the other ones, we're a bit behind. I need to work on that. Check out our Facebook page, Cathy and Dave's Hobby Hangouts, where I've posted a work in progress of Thanos that I built in one of the early streams. So go check that out. He's looking very, very blue and shiny, and I'm very pleased with him at the moment. So he's looking good, and we shall post some. We'll find
some other stuff.
You've posted some of your stuff. We'll find the cow.
Yes, the cow.
The cow.
I think I'm still working on the cow. But...
some other stuff you've done.
Yeah.
So yes, if you want to see all the things we've done, check that out. If you want to share things you've done, please feel free to. We'd love to see what you've been. We'd love to. How many Gene Stealers you done, Mal? That'll be the next question. Lots is the answer. Other than that, I think bedtime.
Thank you. Stay safe. And yes, we should rest now.
Yes. Night night. Bye bye.